Today's video is all about learning how to roast coffee. New home coffee roasters are going to love this. If you are a Behmor guy or girl, this is going to be the video for you. And if you don't roast on a Behmor, there's some great information here that's going to help you learn how to roast coffee at home so that you can have a great result. All right, welcome to the Virtual Coffee Lab, and thank you for joining me today. I've been sharing quite a few videos about my home coffee roasting journey, and I thought that this would be the appropriate time to have some viewers like you share their experiences. I've got a roasting friend that I met through this channel who's been watching my videos, and he's been learning how to roast on the Behmor. He's been asking me some questions. We've been interacting offline, and so I've invited him to come on the show today and to actually talk about his experiences. I'd like to introduce him to you now. All right, everyone, I want to welcome you again to the Virtual Coffee Lab. I'm here with Lou, a roasting friend. We met online and we've been talking about the Behmor and roasting with the Behmor. Lou is a newer roaster, a newer home roaster. And through his journey, he's been asking me some questions. He's been sharing some of his results. And I thought it was important enough, the journey that Lou has been on, to be able to share that with you, because there are so many Behmor roasters, and really the principles that we're going to be talking about today apply to all home roasters. So if you don't have a Behmor, don't worry, don't leave, because there's some great information that's going to be shared here. We're going to show some profiles and actually talk about how you can roast great coffee on the Behmor. So Lou, it's so good to have you here. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, the reason I bought a Behmor, by the way, was because there was such a large following. So many people seem to use that, and I actually have my mind on a different one, but I said, okay, I think I want the Behmor. And anyway, when I started roasting, it's the first thing I knew. I didn't know much about roasting except there are different levels. Okay, so when you start roasting, you can maybe start at a cinnamon level, whatever that was, really light level, or you can go all the way through Vienna. Some people like it dark, some people like it light, and all that. And so on the Behmor, I thought, okay, well, how does it approach that? And they've got sort of an automated process that they'll talk about where, oh, you push 1 pound and you push start. And that's all you need to do. And in that push button type of thought, it's like, oh, you push the button and you wait and your coffee pops out the other side and it's ready to go. And that wasn't what I found. It was nice to have that automatic feature. I know it attracts a lot of people. It didn't really attract me, but it looked kind of nice. What I did like was the manual features, because I was formerly an engineer, and so I wanted to do that. But there's so many variables involved in roasting that I quickly found I couldn't use the automatic features. And so anyway, as my knowledge started to change when I got into roasting, I knew about first crack. I knew that coffee cracked when you roasted it, a lot like popcorn cracks or something. I go, oh, okay, that's nice. But I didn't know anything about where it was as far as the development goes. And so I just know, oh, okay, I got first crack, and that's what it is. I also knew that the longer you roast the coffee, the darker it gets. Still didn't know anything about the 3 phases of coffee development. And now I kind of do. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. I've learned the 3 different coffee phases and how important they are to control each one. I didn't have control before. I just thought, oh, you push the button, you get the heat on, it can be hotter or cooler, oh, whatever. But I didn't know that actually controlled something. So when I became aware of 3 phases, I eventually thought, okay, if I can control these, I have to know how. And by knowing how, I did all my research online and looked at how you control it. And quite honestly, they were for more sophisticated machines than the Behmor. I said, well, I have a Behmor. How do I take what I've got on the Behmor and apply that to what I've just learned about roasting phases? And that's where I'm at now. That's where the challenge is now, to couple those two things together. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting to hear. And since you just shared this journey in just a minute, can you tell us how that has impacted the result of your coffee?
Yeah. It was a little bit frustrating because I tend to like a little bit of a lighter roast. See, I didn't even know what these names were, but now I'm smart and I can use the names. I like somewhere between a city and a city plus roast. Most people would probably call it a medium roast or a medium to light roast, as opposed to the darker stuff. And so I said, I kind of want it a little lighter. How do I do that?
Yeah.
That's what kind of pushed me into understanding more of what the development was and what I could do to control that. And initially I just knew, it was heat. It was all about heat. I didn't think much about timing. I didn't know anything about dry end or browning, or I didn't know any of that stuff. But as I learned that, then I started thinking differently. It just made me think differently. And when I think differently, I control things differently, like how much heat, or when to open the door, or whatever I got to do to try and control things.
So the end result, what was the end result when you started doing that? How did the coffee taste compared to before?
Yeah, when I started out, it didn't seem to have a whole lot of effect until I finally figured it out a little better. And when I did, I started getting what I wanted. I said, wow, and I look back and I said, I didn't do that much. I didn't really have to be real smart or understand a lot, but it's more of a feeling. It's kind of like an art almost, where, okay, I'm looking at my roasting curves. I took down a lot of data, and maybe we can show some of that data here, that made me kind of make decisions the way I did. Because the coffee, that when it was bad, I could see things on the roast data, on the curves and stuff, that were pretty bad. And when it started to taste good, I started seeing a mimic or like a interpretation of what the professionals have.
Let's talk about that. So let me bring up, I think, your first graph that you shared with me.
Yeah, okay. This is simply like an Excel spreadsheet. It's different on the Mac. It's called something else, but it's actually Open Office is what I used on the Mac. But basically, it's a spreadsheet, and you put in the data. First thing you got to do is record data as you roast. Watch the temperatures. I was watching everything, A and B temps on the Behmor, recording them every 30 seconds for a while. Now I record, every 30 seconds. Now I record once a minute, and that's fine for what I do. But this graph here, it shows my very limited knowledge of what I knew. All I knew was I had first crack. I knew how long it went, and I had my temperature data. And so I just plotted it out. I said, okay, you can see first crack on the left there, and when it finally ends, it's the dotted line over to the right, a minute and something to the right. And that was my information. That's what I started with before I started knowing more about what I was doing.
Okay, and that was without a pre-warm.
Right, without a pre-warm, and I can't remember on this roast if I was just using 100% heat. I think I probably was. And so what the curve is here, the red curve is the B temperature. The A temperature, the exhaust temperature, doesn't do anything. It stays at a very low value until after 7.5 minutes on the Behmor 2000.
Right.
Then that happens, that vent to the afterburner or whatever's exactly going on there, I'm not sure. But then the B temperature drops because it's got air coming in, blowing out, and the A temperature starts to go way up. So that just further confuses things. But at this point, all I knew is I had my B temperature, which I thought resembled my actual bean temperature.
Talk about the next steps for your plotting and your experience as I get this next graph brought up here.
Okay. Yeah, well, anyway, I started running into, I wanted to see more data. And it was data that I had, and I wanted to see how that data might relate to what I could control and where I wanted to go, to kind of try and put it all together. And so the next graph that we're going to see shows just more things I was looking at. Still, all I plotted was what's called the B temperature. But you can see I'm trying to blow the picture up bigger so I can see it too, but where you see it where it says vent opened on the left there and the temperature drops, I didn't record that on that first graph, but on this one you can see how that B temperature drops. And then you can see when first crack occurs and when I pressed cool and I opened the door a little bit, but you can see how the temperature actually went up, because I didn't know that as beans roast, especially after first crack, it's endothermic. It's exothermic.
Exothermic,
Which
yeah.
means, the bean roasting gives off energy as well. It doesn't just soak it up and take it on. It actually gives it off. And so anyway, you see that temperature curve actually go up again. And so I was looking at more things here, still only the B temperature, but looking at more events that would be happening along with it that might, control it or affect it in some way.
So are we looking at a just continued P1 full power in the manual mode on this example as well?
I think so, because if I had been controlling heat at this point, I would have shown where I changed it. And I'm pretty sure I did not do that on roast 7. I did it shortly thereafter, and you'll definitely see it on the next graph. But this is where I was finally saying, hey, what's happening with this heat? And how can I control that? And where can I control that? Like if it's coming after the vent opens, the first crack, and what I'm finding out today, or like a week or two ago, is I need to control that way back when things were happening, because I get this temperature kind of momentum going, and I didn't realize I was, and here I am trying to fix it later on, and it's kind of like the analogy I use is you put a cold cast iron pan on a stove, and you want it to be warm enough to cook your scrambled eggs, so you crank the heat up. And by the time it's just about the right temperature, it's too late, and that thing is going away, and it's getting really
that the momentum of the heat, right? Okay, so the third graph looks a lot different than the others. You're starting to get fancy, but why don't you identify the lines and talk about what's happening here in this graph that we've got?
Well, this is okay. This is roast 13, and so the other one we looked at was roast 7. So it was only 5 roasts between there, and you can see it looks rather busy on this chart or on this graph of what's going on. But still, the orange curve is the bean temperature, or it's the B temperature, which is the chamber temperature. And if I plotted the exhaust temp as well, the A temperature, and that's at the bottom, can't see it very well because quite openly, it's not worth much to see. The little gray line on the bottom there, you can look at the bottom arrow and you go along that, and you can see how it goes up when the vent opens up. Anyway, what I've shown on here is, along with the temperatures, I finally identified when things were happening. Like, the beans are starting to get brown. That's a very key thing to know, because what I understood was the relationship between, and you have a video on this, the relationship between the times of the phase, how they should relate with one another. I thought, well, why don't I start measuring that, see how well I'm doing, see if I'm anywhere close. And so you'll see at the top the drying phase, and I tried to make that yellow because I was thinking, the beans are going to turn yellow. And the browning phase goes on there, and then you see the development phase. So now we're talking in terms of phases, not so much first crack. It's nice to know where it is because that's the end of the second stage or second phase. But I didn't care about that so much as I cared about what's happening in those preceding stages. Then I also started doing you see the green curve on there. It's called delta B. In common coffee language, that might be called the rate of rise curve. I hesitated to use that term because it's only a B temperature. It's not the actual bean or seed temperature as it's being roasted. So delta B is kind of how much my temperature is changing, increasing. And you can see as the temperature goes, it kind of flattens up at the top. Well, that's this green curve is dropping down to where it's going to reach almost zero, or it's going to drop. And that's the temperature plateauing out. in my chamber. This wound up being one of my best roasts ever. And I said, well, why? I wanted it that way, but what on this graph can I take away from that? What can I see? And so I started seeing, obviously I could, okay, the drying went about this and the browning went about there and the development was about this. And I figured out those percentages and I used those. Down at the bottom, though, is where I controlled the actual element temperature that is used for heating. And you can see the really red one is 100%. The next one is 75%. And you can see during development, I was only running 25% power. And quite honestly, I probably could have turned that power off because 25% is very little. Yeah. But it's developed just fine, probably because I had some momentum going in browning. And that's just the property behind this roaster and what I've had, what I've got to learn.
Right. What's happening during this roasting process, as far as temperatures go, when you change from a 100% to a 75% to whatever, it's not an instantaneous change because everything inside that roaster is hot. The cage is hot. The walls of the roaster are hot. And so it's going to take a little while for that to slow down. But then just the opposite can happen. If you start to cool too early and then it does cool off, it's going to mess things up because you're going to have to work really hard and you really won't have enough time to recover your roast, right? Yeah.
What I was going to say, I've heard this about the Behmor, that you have to think ahead on it. You've got to think in advance. They even say that, I believe, in the instruction manual, that you have to think ahead of what you're going to do. And they something like you need to think ahead 30 seconds. And I think you need to think ahead a minute or two, is what I found out. You need to be prepared of what might be happening based on what you're doing right now and where you think it's going to go.
Can you share just a little bit about how applying your senses to the roast made any sort of a change or an improvement of what was happening?
Yeah, I kind of forgot to mention that. So I'm really glad that you just brought that up. Along with the data, which is easy to get because you can record data, there were other things going on. You have the audible first crack, you can hear things. But as well as that, you can see to some extent in the Behmor, you can see things like browning, but you can smell things. And the smell was particularly important for me to know when browning was beginning and drying was ending. I mean, I love to smell coffee, but that's not why I want to smell it. But when I wasn't sure about whether browning was beginning, my nose would tell me pretty certainly. And that's something that actually, quite honestly, I'm still working on. I'm still trying to get that better tune right now for what I want to do. I don't want to get to the point where I'm smelling something burned, but the nose is.
Yeah, during that dry phase, you should be smelling things. Well, in the beginning, you don't really smell anything. Then you start to smell kind of maybe some grassy kind of smells. But when you start to get really close to the green going away and the beans becoming yellow, you start to get more of a like a bread kind of a smell, like a yeasty bread smell, right? Is that what you were smelling? Something like that?
Yeah, it was. That's exactly right. I noticed something else too, Mike. I haven't mentioned this to you before, but as I watch the beans tumble as they're turning, when I'm in the drying phase, they're like gravel. They fall, it falls rather quickly, easily, lightly. But as I'm getting it dry and it's starting to move into browning, it tumbles differently even. I mean, I noticed that. I thought, whoa, it's like tumbling more slowly. And that, I'm still going to check that out and make sure I'm not just, dreaming something, but it's something that I can actually almost go by. I'm looking like, hey, that seems to be falling differently now than it did before.
Nice. Yeah, I've never heard that before, Lou. That's a great observation. I think, they're getting lighter. Obviously, they're getting lighter. The beans are starting to swell a little bit. So I would think that they would behave differently. So that's a great observation.
Yeah, it was that swelling. It's changing size, it's changing dimension. And I think that's what really um, had a lot to do with it, because before there was more like small gravel that can roll, whereas when it gets larger, it's more like footballs and they're trying to tumble
Yeah,
over. They tumble different.
nice. You opening the door at all to look at the beans? How are you seeing with the light that's in there? Are you using any other type of light to be able to monitor the color? Because you've got a yellow Behmor tint.
What I did to help things was I used an external lamp, like a reading light, like you might see a reading light. It has a gooseneck little thing on it, you can bend it. And I pointed it in on an angle into my beans. And then I look at my beans from the opposite angle on the other side. And I can get a lot better um, color correction, if you will, on that. To where, when I'm seeing more correctly what the bean is actually doing, as opposed to that inner light that they have in there, which is kind of already yellowing the picture a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't tell quite as much what was going on. And by the way, when I do pop the door like that, I do understand that I'm letting heat out. You
Yeah.
have to remember that too. So I'm not going to pop it open and just keep looking at it. And, oh yeah,
Yeah.
look at your heat's dropping. You got to close the door. So I'm learning all
So
that stuff.
when you crack that door, so last week when I was talking about how important the dry phase was, my roast got away from me. I had too much momentum coming through dry, and
Yep.
so we talked about that. But I talked about the emergency brake. I talked about turning up the fan. On a Behmor, you can open up the door. If your roast is really starting to move too quickly, you can crack the door. But unfortunately, because there's this delay of sometimes a minute before you realize what's happening, it's almost too late. So if you get enough roasts under your belt, there still is a possibility where you can, if you're watching your temperatures and you're logging this, there is a possibility to crack that door, slow things down a little bit to recover. Have you tried that, or have you experienced that?
Yes, I have tried that. The first time I tried that was on cooling, because
Okay.
if you push the cool button, it stops heating and it keeps the air moving. Well, that's cooling what I would call very slowly. And I did have some curves of that. Matter of fact, the first one may have had that curve of it just cooling with the door shut. And I tried
Mm-hmm.
cooling with the door open, and it dropped, 50 degrees per minute or faster. So with the door open, you're getting very serious about wanting to cool. And now, quite honestly, I pull the beans out. When I want them to cool, I pull them up, dump them in a little cheapo cooler that I made.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
that
I think
doesn't much, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the reality with a Behmor. Is the only way you're going to get those beans cool quick is to remove the drum, put on some oven mitt gloves or something to get that drum out and to get those beans out of that cage and get them to cool quickly. So on this graph, that's when you did that. Is that marked anywhere? Let's see. First crack, pull drum. There it is. So let's see, I've seen the percentages. So as far as your roasting phase goes, I see 100, 75, 25. That's the power setting.
That's the
But
power.
how about the phase percentages? So I've done some videos talking about that. One of them was the 3 tips for new home coffee roasters, which kind of breaks down the phases. Did you kind of look at your percentages and notice anything interesting?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, roast 13. This is interesting what happened to me here. I think I had an error in determining where my drying was finishing, the dry end, and where browning was started. That makes a huge difference in how long your phases are. So what I determined finally on dry end, my drying stage is 5 minutes long, and the total roast time is 9 minutes. And so 5 minutes out of 9 minutes is 56%.
Mhm.
The browning stage came out at 2 minutes and 39 seconds, which is 30%. And the development stage on the far right there came out to 1 minute and 21 seconds, which was 15%. Now, the 15%, I think that's probably okay. I think my drying stage is probably a little longer than I probably want it to be. I think what your other video had said was 50% or less. Browning
That's a goal.
30%, that's right. So now when I look at these things, I can say, hey, there was one time I thought I had a really bad roast. I just didn't like the way it went or anything. And then I looked at the numbers later when I pulled it out and I said, these percentages look pretty good. And I tasted it finally and it tasted great. I mean, it's amazing how data can really tell you things like that.
You know, I think that our senses are very important. So I don't want to say that we should all be focusing on graphs, but you're right. I mean, when you start to analyze what really happened, you look at the facts and you take that, which is the graph we're looking at, and you combine that with the senses. That does two things. One, it confirms what we think happened. And two, it gives us confidence so that we can repeat what we did. So for those that are listening, Lou can take this roast and he can repeat this. He can pretty much repeat this. So Lou knows, and he hasn't really shared this part of it yet, but on this roast, he pre-warmed his roaster. How long did you pre-warm before you put the beans in?
Yeah, this one I pre-warmed for 3 minutes. And what I did on the next roast after this was instead of going to minutes, I went to temperature. So I pre-warmed to 200 degrees before I started. And my reason for doing that was I wanted to get rid of the cold cast iron skillet type example,
right,
and start out somewhat close to where I wanted my beans to be. Because like on other drum roasters, like the one you have, Mike, and other higher end machines, kind of, you drop the beans into a preheated rolling,
yes,
drum, and you say, "Oh, I'm dropping, and you're going in at this temperature." I can't say that when I just put cold beans in there and a cold drum and I push start. Right. How much of my drying time was just getting up to temperature? And then the worst part is, as it got up to the right temperature to start drying, which I don't know where drying began, I don't know that, but I've got too much energy going to the point where it rushed just right into browning. And I'm kind of, now I'm in trouble because so I try and cut that down, but it's almost too late. The first crack's happening and I'm ripping my hair out. These aren't going well.
I roasted so many roasts out of Behmor. That's why I've got less hair now. Okay, so let's do the audience a huge favor here, okay? And we haven't prepared this, and Lou has no idea what I'm about to ask. But Lou, share your Behmor recipe from the pre-warming and the temperatures, like the P1, the times, if you can. So if somebody that's new to Behmor or somebody that hasn't really tried to do a manual mode and they want to do this, tell them just in the very simple steps, here's the recipe. Can you do that?
Okay. Yep, I can. And I just want to give one statement up front is these are not golden at all. This is exactly what I'm working on. So when I'm working on it, it's not done at all. But here's where I'm at.
All right. Before we get to this next segment, I just wanted to share how important community is. Home coffee roasters are in the process of learning. We're constantly learning. And then when we can share information, that's really helpful. The way that you can help share information with other home coffee roasters is to hit the like button right now so that YouTube will see that something good is going on here. And when a home coffee roaster is searching for videos to learn how to roast coffee, they'll find these videos. Also, if you could hit the subscribe button, that helps me out a lot. And most important, if you like what you see and you want to be notified, hit that notification bell and you'll be the first to know when new videos are uploaded. All right, let's get back to the segment with Lou and I talking about roasting on the Behmor.
In the pre-warming, the drum is out. Okay. It's out of the roaster during pre-warm. And so, but I also leave the chaff tray in because I want the chaff tray to warm up. That's part of the momentum got going there. So, and then when it hits 200 degrees, my beans are already in my drum, which is at room temperature. It's not warmed up or anything. And then I very carefully, with my gloves on, put that in the hot oven, and then I close the door, and that's my beginning of roast. That's when I actually start.
Okay.
So I guess I forgot to mention that. And what I do is I press 1, which is 1 pound, and I push start. Now that's an automatic roast. You can't not start in an automatic roast. It just does it. And then I push P5 after that. So P5 means something different after you started a roast than before. Before the roast begins, like if you push, you can push the P number for a profile. And if you don't push any P number 1 through 5 before you start roasting, it will select profile 1 for you, which is 100% heat, which is the way I want it. So, well, for a second it is. Anyway, then I push start and I push P5, which says I want it at 100%, and here it is. I've got control. Then the P numbers mean percentage of heat after that, not profile. I had to learn that about the P. Start drying. Watch accurately for dry end. Really keep an eye on that. When you just because you want to mark the point on the graph like I did, that's really what it's for. But you're going to have some energy in drying, and that's why I started with 100%. And when I switched to 75%, this one was past the point where browning started. Now I would recommend a little bit before browning starts, go to 75%. It's like everything should shift left a little bit, I think, on here. And anticipate first crack. It's going to be roughly within 30 seconds to a minute every time of where you have it, probably. If you're roasting in a controlled environment, if you're out in a garage or something or outdoors, then it's a little more difficult to do this. But anticipate first crack and drop that temperature down even lower, 25%. That's kind of where I'm at right now, and I'm going to see what happens. But I think it helps a lot.
Well, that's great information, and I think that the viewers are really going to appreciate the time you've taken to share this. Is there anything that you want to mention as far as some of your goals and what you're hoping to do with the Behmor?
Yeah, I haven't yet achieved the light roast that I wanted, and I still don't know why. I think I do know why, and I'm trying, like I'm just showing you about changing the heating percentages. I'm going to try and do something there to, I mean, I don't want a cinnamon roast. I don't want something super light. I don't even want city. I try city plus, but I want it reliably. Whereas I think I'm maybe going just a tad farther than that now. So that's kind of my goals right now, to pull that in. Because if I get some of the, the other coffees like an Ethiopian or something that's got a lot more of those citrus and blueberry notes and things like that.
Yeah.
I want to be down more in on the lighter side of roasting, what they call the more acidic and more floral end of things. I'd rather be there. So that's kind of what my goal is. I would say though that you folks that have purchased Behmors, it's a really nice piece of equipment. It runs very reliably. I'm glad I got it, and I'm going to be able to do just fine with it. Will it be my last roaster? Probably not, but my advice would be just be patient. Allow yourself to fail. It's okay. It'll cost you some beans to do this, but you're learning just like I was learning, and it's not a setback. It's actually something very good that you've learned. And if it takes a few burnt beans or underdeveloped beans to teach, it's great tuition to have to pay.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to express that there really is opportunity to have some great roasts with the Behmor, sharing your experience. That's awesome. That's what this whole, what I'm trying to create here is an environment, a community to allow home roasters to learn, regardless of what they know or don't know, whether they're brand new or whether they're a little bit advanced. And so this channel isn't just about me, it's about sharing information. And so that's why this time that we've had together, Lou, is so important to, let people see somebody else other than me who is in the midst of learning, share their experience. Lou, thanks so much for sharing this information with me and with those that are viewers of the Virtual Coffee Lab. I really appreciate your time in doing that.
You're welcome. I was glad to share this because I can only imagine people are going through exactly what I went through. Maybe they're more advanced than me. Maybe they're not to the point where I am now. It doesn't matter. We all share together and we all learn together. It's kind of a fun journey.
All right. Well, thanks again for sharing your information, and we'll try to get an update to the rest of the community here as things progress. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right, you guys, it was so good to have Lou on the program today. He has learned so much, and I've been learning from Lou as well. So the Behmor 2000 is a great roaster. I don't have the 2000, I have the 1600 plus, and there are some differences. And so I was able to learn a lot about his roaster, and it was nice to see his journey here. So I hope that this video was helpful for you, and I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next week at the Virtual Coffee Lab.